terror wasn't just a consequence of the Mongol conquests, it was the very essence of their strategy. Genghis Khan didn't need to march on every city to subjugate it. Fear did it for him. When the Khan's envoys arrived at the gates, they brought a simple choice: surrender and be incorporated into the empire, or resist and witness the fate of the fools who dared to defy the Mongols. But the threat was not empty. In every city that dared to resist, mountains of skulls were erected as grotesque warnings. Mutilated survivors were set free only to tell neighboring cities about the destruction that was coming. And when the walls trembled with the thunder of Mongol horses, many had already chosen surrender before the first blow was even struck. For Genghis Khan, war was not just brute force, it was a battle of minds, a calculated spectacle of horror. His tactics went beyond slaughter. Prisoners were used as human shields, women and children forced to march in the front lines to exhaust enemy arrows, and even severed heads were catapulted into besieged cities, spreading panic like an invisible plague. Feigned retreats were one of his favorite weapons. The Mongols would simulate a desperate escape, only to lure eager armies into a deadly trap, where mounted archers would decimate their enemies before they realized their mistake. Victory wasn't just won on the battlefield, but long before the fight even began. After all, how do you face an army that has already won inside your own mind? What does total annihilation mean? For the Mongols, it wasn't just about killing, it was about erasing any trace of resistance from history. In 1220, the city of Termez, in present-day Uzbekistan, learned this the hard way. After resisting for 2 days, its walls fell, and the massacre began. Each Mongol soldier was given a quota of people to execute, turning the slaughter into a systematic process. But the horror didn't stop there. Among the piled-up corpses, the Mongols searched for something precious. Not gold, not silver, but what might be hidden inside the dead. The desperate inhabitants, hoping to save their riches, had swallowed their jewels. The result? Bodies were cut open, viscera scattered, and soldiers rummaged through the remains in search of pearls, diamonds, and any hidden treasure. But if Termez was a bloodbath, the destruction of Kiev in 1240 was a portrait of the apocalypse. Once one of the largest cities in Eastern Europe, Kiev saw its gates collapse under Mongol fury. What happened next went beyond the usual brutality of war. Houses were set on fire, families exterminated, temples looted. Of its 50,000 inhabitants, only about 2,000 survived. When a European diplomat arrived in the city months later, he described a ghostly sight: empty streets, bones scattered on the ground, and a silence so deep that even the wind seemed to mourn the dead. Kiev ceased to be a thriving trade center and became a haunted ruin, a silent warning to any other city that dared to challenge the Mongols. And then there was Urgench, a city so prosperous that even the Mongols struggled to take it. After an exhausting battle, victory finally came, but a new problem arose: how to deal with such a large population. Genghis Khan's answer was the industrialization of massacre. The army received meticulous orders. Each of the 50,000 Mongol soldiers had to execute 24 people. The result? Up to 1.2 million dead in a matter of days. But there was something even more disturbing. As the executions took place, Mongol engineers tested new forms of destruction, perfecting siege techniques, strategically setting buildings on fire, and even developing new ways to terrorize those who watched the spectacle of death. And for those who believed that surrender guaranteed mercy, Merv and Nishapur were the greatest lessons in deception. When Merv peacefully opened its gates, the Mongols assured that nothing would happen, until the next day, when the entire city was exterminated, including women, children, and even domestic animals. In Nishapur, the scene was even worse. A relative of Genghis Khan had been killed in battle, and his response was to turn the city into a sea of blood. Every living being was hunted and eliminated. The streets overflowed with corpses, and the Khan himself ordered that the massacre be so complete that even dogs and cats were slaughtered. The message was clear: resisting the Mongols was a fatal mistake, but trusting them was an even greater one. If the West knew Mongol terror, the East experienced Genghis Khan's relentless patience. China, with its impregnable fortresses and colossal armies, seemed an impossible obstacle. but only to those who didn't understand Mongol persistence. It took 70 years for the Song dynasty to be crushed, and the cost of this conquest was paid in blood. It is estimated that 30 million Chinese died during the war, victims of sieges, starvation, and limitless brutality. The grand walled cities, protected for centuries, fell one by one, razed by Mongol catapults and the systematic destruction of crops and supply lines. To the Chinese people, the Mongols weren't just conquerors. They were specters that came to turn millennia-old empires into smoldering ruins. But if China was taken with time, Baghdad fell like thunder. In 1258, under the orders of Hulagu Khan, Genghis's grandson, the Mongols marched into the heart of the Islamic world. The city, a beacon of knowledge and culture, was besieged, looted, and ultimately erased from history. The legendary House of Wisdom, filled with manuscripts preserving centuries of knowledge, was thrown into the Tigris River, which, according to reports, darkened with the ink of destroyed books. The Caliph, the supreme leader of Islam, was captured and killed in a symbolic manner, wrapped in a carpet and trampled to death, as it was believed that noble blood should not touch the ground. But the soil of Baghdad needed no more blood. It was already soaked with that of hundreds of thousands of inhabitants who were massacred without distinction. The Islamic Empire, once the center of the world, was reduced to ashes, and the Mongols moved on, leaving only echoes of terror behind them. The Mongols did not merely kill. They turned destruction into a spectacle, an art of horror that echoed through generations. When they took Persepolis, the ancient Persian capital, the screams of the last survivors could barely be heard over the crackling flames devouring the temples and palaces. For the Mongols, plundering was not just a means of enrichment, it was a demonstration of absolute power. Intellectuals were dragged from their libraries and beheaded, priests slaughtered before their own altars, and defeated soldiers forced to fight to the death against one another in a gruesome display of forced carnage. When there was no one left to kill, the Mongol army moved on, leaving behind only the carcasses of emptied cities and the wind blowing through the ashes like a silent lament. And when they arrived in Syria, Mongol terror was already a dark whisper in the halls of mosques and the vibrant markets of Damascus. The Khan's troops swept through the Middle East like a wildfire, reducing fortresses to ruins and turning cities into graveyards. Men were impaled by the thousands, women and children were thrown alive from towers, and the most unfortunate were kept alive only to witness the destruction of their homes and the extermination of their families. In Aleppo, the walls could not hold back Mongol fury. When the defenses fell, the city was delivered to slaughter, and its inhabitants reduced to mere shadows in history. And the worst part? The fear did not end with the battle. The conquered lands became open-air prisons, where any sign of dissent was met with further massacres. The Mongol Empire did not merely conquer, it taught, through fire and blood, that submission was the only possible fate for those who dared to resist. Genghis Khan and his Mongol hordes were not just conquerors. They were architects of annihilation. Their empire was built on the bones of civilizations, their banners carried by storms of fire and steel. No other force in history has erased entire cities with such ruthless efficiency, turning prosperous metropolises into graveyards of silent despair. From China to the Middle East, from the Russian steppes to the heart of Europe, the Mongols left behind more than just destruction. They left scars that shaped the course of history itself. Even now, centuries later, the whispers of their terror still echo in the ruins they left behind. But was Genghis Khan merely a savage warlord, or was he a necessary force of history, an agent of chaos that reshaped the world in his wake? His conquests created one of the largest empires the world has ever seen. His tactics revolutionized warfare, and his rule forged connections between East and West that would last beyond his own lifetime. Yet, his name will forever be written in blood, remembered not just for his brilliance, but for the devastation he unleashed. The Mongol Empire was more than just a kingdom. It was an era of unstoppable destruction, the likes of which the world had never seen before and may never see again. If you found this story as fascinating as it is terrifying, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more untold tales of history's darkest chapters. Who do you think was the most ruthless conqueror of all time? Let us know in the comments below.